Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "What do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah, and or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah.
Well, first, I would like to point out immediately there's a point where we have this idea of miracles and faith again.
Yeah.
Which we just discussed. So it's repeated again. And you see here, even the people who witnessed the miracle now are being rebuked by Jesus for not believing, even though they saw what happened. And again, there's this idea that they're a bit dull. I don't know. That's going to reoccur again. Okay, so the Son of Man is an interesting term that's being used here. Obviously, people have thought for a long time it's referring to Daniel, right? In the Old Testament, and it's to do with the eschatology of the end times and the Messiah that's going to come, right? So that's one thing to look into, and maybe you want to say more on.
I don't have anything to say on that as well. Also, Ezekiel, Son of Man. Yeah.
So that's one thing. The other thing is, from a theological perspective, it's affirming, at least it has been seen as affirming the human nature of Christ.
Yeah.
Right. So at the Council of Chalcedon, they decide on diophysitism, which is that Christ has two natures. Right? He has a fully divine nature and a fully human nature, and this is taken to imply this as well. So the Son of God, Son of Man. So that's some things that I wanted to say.
Why is, like, I know you mentioned that it's going back to Daniel and Ezekiel, but why was the Son of Man? Like, why is that term so significant? Because it seems like whenever it's used, it really has such a heightened importance. I mean, why Son of Man and not Son of God?
Well, I think it is because it's referring to an eschatological figure, which would say that it's to do with like the end of the world, right? It's the thing that's going to save us at the end of the world. So I think that's why it's such an important term, and it's in a way I think it's been seen as more important than Son of God, even because people can interpret Son of God in a more general way, where we're all sons of God in a sense. But Son of Man is like the special designator that's been used in the Old Testament for a specific figure. So I think that's why people place so much emphasis on it.
And then one more question I had is, so the switch from Simon to Peter is a pretty big, an important switch, right? Peter, Petros is rock in Greek. So Peter's, the rock. But it seems like to on first glance, it seems like such an ordinary thing, but who do you say I am? And Simon just answers, "We're the Messiah, the Son of living God." Like that's enough for just go, "Blessed are you, Simon. You are Peter, and on this rock I will build, my church." Like, why is that answer, that simple answer from Simon, "You are the Messiah, the Son of God, Son of living God," in response to who I am? Why is that such a monumental thing to cause this huge reaction from Jesus?
Yeah, I mean, I guess on one level it shows the importance of confessing with your mouth, as it says elsewhere. I guess also they were pretty much doing everything together, the disciples and Jesus. Jesus was watching how the disciples were reacting to his miracles and his teachings, and gets to this point where something has changed in Peter, and he says this, and it's like it changes from here. In terms of the messianic secret, which you mentioned, Philip, like that comes up maybe more in Mark's gospel.
Yeah. And isn't it also, I mean, quite ironic too that Simon is the rock, right? So he becomes Peter the rock, and then the rock is think of something of stable, hard, unmoving, and yet later it's precisely Peter that denies Christ.
Yeah. So I was about to just talk about exactly that point. So I think there's a lot of things going on here. I think one way you can interpret this, and maybe it's the favorable way, I don't know, depends what you believe. But you could say this is a statement of Jesus' divinity, right? Which would be, this would kind of be against what I just said, which was that Son of God is like a general thing. But then if you're saying that this is just a general term for anybody, then I think I agree with, or I think Athan is pointing out a great point here. If this is a general thing, then why is it so important for Christ that he's willing to say, okay, so you're confessing this, and obviously if we know church history, so we know this is going to be the foundation of the church. So as the foundation of the church, this is what the church is going to confess as well. So I see it as, obviously we know that the church confesses the divinity of Christ. So this would be the follow-up, right? This is where it starts, and it follows on from here. And I think that makes sense, because if it's not about the divinity of Christ, then there's a question of why it's placed as the main confession. And I think this is also related to the motifs to do with both Peter. So Peter here is saying, if we interpret it as the divinity of Christ, right? He's saying something that's blasphemous, right? Yeah. The man is divine. Yeah. This is related to what I just said about Son of Man, where we talked about emphasizing his humanity. So now we have humanity emphasized, and now his divinity is being emphasized if we read it on this interpretation. And we have this idea that Peter, as you said, is later going to struggle with this because he said something blasphemous for those times, and now he's going to change it later on when he's directly point blank asked. And I think that represents sort of what's going to happen later with early Christian believers, where a lot of them actually died for their faith, where they refused to do what Peter did. Which was go back on what they profess to believe.
And even Peter's denial was even something lesser than that. It was even knowing Jesus was what he denied. Yeah. It wasn't even this level of denying the divinity of Christ. It was like he even fell at that hurdle. But that is amazing. I think it's an amazing story of redemption. The fact that he has this watershed moment with Jesus, and then he sinks to the lowest point of all the disciples, I guess. Well, okay, apart from Judas.
yeah, of course.
And then is raised up with that amazing scene after Jesus' resurrection. So yeah, if you were, making this up, it would be an amazing story arc. But yeah,
right. And obviously, if we're going with this, then there's this idea that it's sort of meant to happen when everybody's playing their role out here. So it's interesting that he has to have this like redemptive thing before he gets to the point where he's meant to be.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I wanted to point, obviously, this is the foundation of the church. The keys of the kingdom are being given here from Christ to his apostles, right? And then later on at Pentecost, this will be shared amongst all of them.
Yeah, so, and that's another thing about the Jews and the Gentiles, like opening up the kingdom, as it were, for the nations, which we see at Pentecost.
Right.